May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke audio podcast. Tassajara Stories today. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today we're going to hear a couple of pieces from the drafts for Tassajara Stories. The early years with Shunryu Suzuki, usually. So right after our pause to meditate, we'll get into that. So when you hear the bell, if you're of a mind, hit pause. And meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever, and we'll get right into the next Tassajara story. Priests. Americans back in the 60s typically had some pretty idealistic preconceptions of what Zen was. As Shunryu Suzuki pointed out, Japanese Zen people did too. The preconceptions were not similar. There was an early Tassajara student who had told Suzuki when he first met him that he wanted to go to Japan and become a monk. Suzuki said, "Maybe it would be better for you to stay and learn our way first." He had good reason. The crash and burn rate for Western Zen students in Japan was high. But he was determined and did go to Japan to study Zen after Shunryu Suzuki had ordained him as a monk. A monk with an independent nature and strong ideas about what the practice was. Entered a tradition where you're not to say no for the first 5 years. He had a tough time. Now he was back, brought to Tassajara to recuperate. Last I'd seen him, he was serious and determined to get enlightened, healthy and focused. Now he was a wreck, frighteningly thin, bug-eyed. He obviously hadn't supplemented the Japanese monastic diet. He stood before me in robes, hands in formal shashu, squeezed in toward his ribs, shaking slightly, talking about rules. Rules? Yes, he said, we're not following them. I told him I thought we had plenty of rules. But he said that we're not practicing Dogen's strict way as recorded by his disciple Kojun Ejo in the Zuimanki, not following the Vinaya, the rules back in Buddha's time, hundreds of rules, with more for women. At Eiheiji, he'd complained about Japanese monks not following the Vinaya as done in Thailand. Not supposed to eat after the sun is at the zenith. Not to touch money or women. Of course, no alcohol. Possessions a monk could have were few and stipulated. There was a prescribed length for the sleeping mat, but he'd seen sake served to monks in Japan. He'd seen them eat meat, and they got married, and so much more. He'd also not been pleased with a schedule at Eiheiji, with lots of ceremony and too little zazen. Regardless of the erring path of others, he did his best to be a monk as monks should be. He would sit zazen in the monks' hall when he was supposed to be elsewhere. Suzuki's son, Hoitsu, told me once, Americans think of my way, and Japanese enter the stream with others. This was a pretty extreme example of that. Hoitsu had to go to Eiheiji to fetch him. Took him to Rinso-in, where he ran off into the mountainous woods above the temple. There was a search for him. I can imagine how distraught they were. They'd get all concerned there when I came back late from a walk. Now here he was at Tassajara in an altered state of consciousness, like an acid trip as he later described it. Not able to relate to others in a normal way, standing by a tree, staring, tense, withdrawn. Suzuki gave an evening talk in the Zendo. The altered monk was, of course, there, standing in the back. Suzuki talked about how Japanese Buddhists flaunt the rules. He went on and on about it, laughing and saying, we're shameless, laughing at how they ate meat, got married, drank sake. It was not the usual Suzuki subtlety. After the lecture, our friend could not be found. Next day at Chosan, morning tea with the abbot, Suzuki and officers agreed it was time to go look for him. Paul Disco came to me and said our friend had run off into the woods the night before and that Suzuki and the officers wanted a few of us to go look for him. He said they chose us because we weren't judgmental and wouldn't be seen as authorities. Actually, I did have judgmental thoughts, but I'd not hit the poor guy over the head with them. Sure weren't in any hurry. Didn't leave until after 11, as they kept thinking he'd come back. 6 were sent out, 2 up the road, 2 upstream, 2 down. Tim Aston and I went downstream, checking spots not visible from the trail. Tim took the path up to the horse pasture. I kept going downstream. Found him sitting zazen, bolt upright, on a boulder in the stream below the narrows. I had a bag lunch for him. Each one of us did. He was famished, but wanted to know if it was past noon, because then he'd have to wait till the next day. I lied. He ate convincingly. I swatted a mosquito. He said I'd spent an eon in the Avicii hell realm for that. More spooky talk. He wept, bemoaning how we'd strayed from the true path. We walked back. After he left Tassajara, he went into a hospital for examination and was kept there. He had severe malnutrition with dry berry that can affect things like mental processing of information and cognitive functions. But he didn't regret having burned his robes before he left. He did it out of respect for the purity of the Dharma and the robes, saying he couldn't maintain it, live up to it. De Prima. Diane de Prima first came to Sokoji on a visit from New York City in 1962, shortly after the Zen Center was incorporated. For her, meeting Suzuki was meeting some rock-bottom place in myself. Diane said that if Suzuki had been an apple picker or a welder, I would have promptly taken up either of those arts. I sat because he sat, to know his mind. It was the first time in my 28 years that I had encountered another human being and felt trust. It blew my tough, sophisticated young artist mind. Back on the East Coast, Prima had some communication with Suzuki via Richard Baker. In 1968, she and her husband, Alan Marlowe, moved to the Bay Area with their 4 children, 2 of them his. Diane, Alan, and the kids had lived at Millbrook with Timothy Leary et al. In San Francisco, they got involved with the Diggers, some of whom they moved across the street from in the Haight. The Diggers were anarchists who distributed free food, clothing, books, and whatever in Golden Gate Park in their free store and via Diane and Alan's Volkswagen bus. They got donations, of course, but I gathered firsthand that some of them were into ripping off the man. I saw one who worked for the post office deliver Christmas gifts he'd liberated from the U.S. mail for kids in poor hippie families. Another bragged his Christmas tree had come from a fat capitalist pig's yard. Some of their support came from collecting welfare using multiple personas. The one I knew best, a woman, was known for that, apparently collecting under a dozen or so names. There were people at Tassajara who knew about that and did not like it at all. Diane had been married to the well-known writer Leroy Jones. They'd been arrested for obscenity for their literary ventures. Diane was a prominent poet whose Memoirs of a Beatnik was published by a French publisher the same year she came to Tassajara. In Sex, Memoir, and the Women of the Beat Generation, Danielle Dumaine wrote that it blurred the lines between fiction and life, art and pornography, and history and fantasy, and that she was regarded as one of the best and only women writers of the beats. In City Lights Books in North Beach, I heard that Don Allen's omission of De Prima's and Joanne Kiger's work from his New American Poetry was one of the few weaknesses of that important book. And all 3 of them were involved with the early Zen Center. Diane first went to Tassajara with the kids in 1969. There were other children and a program for them. It's a great place for kids in the summer. Many of us were familiar with her as a poet and writer of the recently distributed Revolutionary Letters published in underground newspapers. But at Tassajara, we forgot all that, and she blended right in. She wrote a poem there, Tassajara, 1969. Even Buddha is lost in this land, the immensity takes us all with it, pulverizes, and takes us in. Bodhidharma came from the west. Coyote met him. Diane and the kids returned the next 2 summers. The kids participated in a unique event, a children's ordination presided over by Suzuki. Tomoe Katagiri had been there teaching the intricate rakusu sewing, and some parents got the idea, and it happened. The Johansson and Walter and Katagiri kids participated as well. Each received a rakusu with the robe chant and their Buddhist names written on the back in calligraphed kanji. Suzuki said, What this means for all you children is that you're going to be good and brave and beautiful. Some of us thought it was a little too cute and sort of weird for little kids to get Roxus and lay ordination without having practice. They required 3 years for adults, and when they were too young to appreciate it as we big people did. Later that summer, Diane would receive a Roxu in a lay ordination in the city. Diane had dedicated Memoirs of a Beatnik to her oldest daughter, Jeannie. Jeannie got involved in the work schedule and practiced too, and lived there some by herself as a student during the first 2 summers of the 70s. She often worked in the dining room. She was precocious, smart, energetic, a good worker, tall for her age, worldly wise for her age. She told me that she first had LSD at Millbrook at the age of 8. People thought she was years older. It was she whom that investment counselor had eyes on and inquired about with me. J.S. was setting tables for guest dinner with Diane and Jeannie and was surprised at the maturity and openness of their conversation. She said she sure couldn't have had a talk like that with her mother. Diane said to her, "I don't worry about her having sex. I just want it to be with someone who's good at it." J.S. said, "She seemed older than 13. She seemed so sexually ripe. She was luscious." Back in the city, Diane wrote a poem for Jeannie. Letter to Jeannie at Tassajara. Dry heat of the Tassajara Canyon, moist warmth of San Francisco summer, bright fog reflecting sunrise as you step out of September's Zindo, heart of your warmth, my girl, as you step out into your Vajra pathway, glinting like your eyes, turned sideways at us. Your high, knowing 13-year-old winch smile, flicking your thin ankles, you trot toward adventure, all sizes and shapes. Oh, may it be various for you, as for me it was. Sparkle like dust motes in the dawn, in the back of gray stores, like the shooting stars over the Hudson, wind in the Berkshire pines. Oh, you have landscapes dramatic like mine never was, uncounted caves to mate in, my Scorpio, bright love, like fire, light up your beauty years on these new, jagged hills. Many years later, Jeannie wrote to me, "I sit with the knowledge that I have always had, that you and I have been sitting together in Suzuki Roshi's lap, and we're there now, and he was nothing but love for us. I have always felt his closeness, as all my life Roshi was never farther from me than my own skin. For on that skin, the tender skin of a 7-year-old, when he touched me for the first time, to the still tender skin of the 11-year-old, as he and Oksan began to make me part of their family, I was tattooed with their profound love. I can still feel today their tiny, loving hands that were constantly patting me, smoothing down my unruly hair, laughingly attempting to quell my natural exuberance, seeking always to help me find the quiet inner expression of the joy in me that at times threatened to overwhelm me. I am looking directly into Roshi's eyes, a light with the mischievous twinkle that was uniquely his, placing one hand on each of my shoulders. He pushes me down as he slowly stands. He then places his hands on each of my ears, and at once, laughing yet quite serious, as he says, "I want you to practice growing this way." He moves his hands slowly out from my ears. "Not so fast this way." His hands come to rest back on my shoulders. And as he completes his sentence, they rise as if lifting the feet of the Buddha. All the while, his eyes are pouring into me the most complete, utter love I have ever known. I know I am utterly safe and will always be. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast, Tassajara Stories. I'm D.C. Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Doggett Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear, lovely Katrinka, and we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.